In regards to the dinim of a carbon chatos, the pasuk says, "Uklicheres a earthenware vessel asher tevushal boy that the carbon was cooked in, yishaver, it needs to be broken." Then the pasuk says, if it was cooked in a copper vessel, umoyrak v'shutav b'moyim, it needs to be scoured and rinsed with water. Rashi on the word yishaver, that it needs to be broken, explains that because what was absorbed inside the pot, inside the keli, becomes noisar, becomes leftovers. We know that every single carbon has a certain amount of time that it needs to be eaten by, and afterwards it's considered leftovers, it needs to be burnt. So Rashi is explaining that because that which was absorbed from the carbon chatos went into this earthenware vessel, it became noisar, that's why it needs to be broken. Then Rashi says that the same thing is true with any carbon, not only the carbon chatos. Now simply, why is Rashi saying this? Because in the previous pasuk, in regards to another din of the carbon chatos, it says that the blood of the carbon chatos that's sprinkled, that's sprayed onto a garment, you need to wash it out. Now this specifically says only regarding a carbon chatos because of the special stringency of a carbon chatos. This does not apply to other carbonos. So when we come to our pasuk immediately afterwards that the earthenware vessel needs to be broken, we could have thought again that this is a special din in the carbon chatos because of the stringency of the carbon chatos. We need to immediately get rid of any of the carbon chatos that got absorbed in the pot, just like we need to wash off the garment that got the blood of the carbon chatos, and therefore it would have only applied to this carbon. This is what Rashi is negating, that no, the reason we're breaking the pot is not because of a special stringency associated with carbon chatos, it's because of noisar, and therefore it applies automatically to all other carbonis as well. However, says the Rebbe, this itself we need to understand. How does Rashi know in Pshutei Shel Mikra that the reason we're breaking it is because of noisar, and therefore is going to apply to all other carbonos, and not that it is something special, unique to carbon chatos because of its stringency, just like you need to wash out the blood of the garment? The Rebbe says, on the contrary, it seems to be difficult to say that it's because of noisar. Number one, noisar is usually regarding some actual food that you could eat and was left over. And now we need to know how to deal with the leftovers. Where that which was absorbed in the pot, which is totally not even, you can't even go ahead and eat it, how does noisar exactly apply to that? Seemingly, it shouldn't have the din of noisar. Another point, if it is in fact because of the din of noisar, then seemingly you should have to break it, not immediately after you cook the carbon in it, but rather after the time of the particular carbon, of when that carbon needs to be eaten by. So seemingly the Torah should have written when you need to break the pot. The Rebbe now moves on to the next part of Rashi. Rashi quotes the word umoyrak, which says regarding copper vessels. Rashi says the word umoyrak is from the word tamruke hanoshim. This is like the cosmetics of women, something that the women rub into their skins. They cleanse their skins. Then Rashi says on the words umoyrak v'shutaf, that it needs to be scoured and rinsed. Rashi explains it needs to be scoured and rinsed in order to spit out, in order to get rid of that which was absorbed in the pot. However, Rashi contrasts in regards to earthenware vessels, the pasuk is teaching you that it will never leave. That which was absorbed will never come out. So the Rebbe asks, number one, this last Rashi seems to be a direct continuation to the first Rashi, where Rashi was speaking about how we need to break the earthenware vessels because of noisar. So why is Rashi interrupting these two Rashis with a translation of the word umoyrak? Number one. Number two, why is Rashi saying over here, when he's speaking about the copper vessels, Rashi is saying, but the klicher is the earthenware vessel, the Torah is teaching you here that it will never come out, that which was absorbed in the pot. It seems to be that we're learning it out from what says by the copper vessel that you need to scour it and rinse it. This is the way you learn out that the earthenware vessel you'll never get rid of what was absorbed. Now, seemingly, we would have learned that already from the first part of the pasuk that said clearly that the earthenware vessel needs to be broken, which seemingly is telling you that there's no other way of getting out what was absorbed in the pot. So why is Rashi saying that it's learned from this part of the pasuk regarding scouring the copper vessel? So the Rebbe explains, in the pasuk before this one, the Torah tells us two different kinds of dinim. One is regards the meat of the carbon chatos, that if it touches any other food, then that other food is going to go up and get the same dinim, the same halachos as the meat of the carbon chatos. In other words, other meat, other food absorbed some of the meat of the carbon chatos, it's going to have all the same din and whatever applies to the meat of the carbon chatos with all of its stringencies. Then the Torah tells us also the other din that we mentioned before regarding the blood of the carbon chatos, that if it sprinkles onto a garment, you need to wash it out. Here we're not speaking about the fact that the garment absorbed the blood. It's just that there is some blood on this garment. We need to wash it out. In fact, you don't even have to wash the whole garment, only the place of the blood. So these are two different kinds of dinim. Again, meat absorbing the flavor or taste from the other food, or the other food absorbing from the carbon chatos, and the fact that there's some blood on a garment. So when we come to our pasuk in regards to the earthenware vessel that the carbon was cooked in, and the pot absorbed some of the meat of the carbon chatos, it makes sense to say that which one of the two dinim of the previous pasuk is this similar to? It is more similar to food absorbing the taste and flavor from the carbon chatos. It's not like the garment that just got some blood on it. And that's why Rashi is learning that the reason we're breaking the earthenware vessel is not because of some stringency of the carbon chatos, like the blood that's sprayed onto a garment. It's rather because it absorbed the flavor of the meat. It became noisar. In other words, the same svara, the same logic that we say, that why when food touches the carbon chatos, now you need to be careful with it, like all the stringencies of a carbon chatos. It's exactly the same idea, the same logic, that because the pot absorbed the flavor, the taste of the carbon chatos, this now impacted the pot. And therefore, if it's because of noisar, this logic is also going to apply to all other carbonates and not only to carbon chatos. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand why it is that we don't learn out this idea that the meat will never leave the keli of an earthenware vessel. We don't learn it out from the fact that the earthenware vessel needs to be broken. Rather, as Rashi learns it out, it's from the fact that the copper vessel is scoured. In other words, even though, yes, it's true, we're breaking the earthenware vessel because of that which it absorbed, but we still wouldn't know that the flavor can never come out. Why? Because since the fact that the earthenware vessel needs to be broken, is coming in continuation to the other din that we said, that food that touched the carbon chatos gets the same stringency as the carbon chatos. So we would say exactly the same thing as what's happening by this pot that the meat was cooked in, that it became like the carbon chatos. In other words, just like the meat is noiser, this pot now is getting sort of like a din of noiser. So just like there's a chiyuv, there's an obligation to burn the noiser, now we have a chiyuv to break the pot. It's almost like the pot itself became noiser, not only in reference to what it absorbed right now. In other words, once the pot got this din, even if we're going to take it out, we would think, possibly we could take it out. But nevertheless, you still have to break the pot. The pot became like noiser now, and therefore it wouldn't be a proof that you can never get the flavor out of the pot. And it's only after we come to the next part of the pasuk where we see that the copper pot could be scoured and rinsed. So, and you don't have to destroy the keli. This teaches you that by the copper keli things could come out, but in an earthenware vessel it actually is never going to come out. However, says the Rebbe, one could ask, but that seemingly by the copper keli as well, if it became noiser, why don't we need to break it even if it got rid of that which it absorbed? It is because of this question that we could now turn around and maybe say, hang on a second. So maybe by the earthenware vessel, the reason we're breaking it is really only because it couldn't get rid of the flavor. But it's not a din that the keli itself became noiser. And this is why what Rashi is coming to clarify by interrupting the two pirushim, the pirush about the klicheres and the one about the copper, with the translation of the word umoirak, which means cleansing, cleaning, rubbing, etc. In other words, Rashi is trying to tell us that in fact this din of umoirak is in fact different to the klicheres. It's the second din of klei nechoshes is going to be more similar to washing off the blood of the carbon chatos. In other words, there's actually two different kinds of dinim happening in our pasuk, similar to the two dinim of the previous pasuk. That is, just like in the previous pasuk, there was a din about food that absorbed from the carbon chatos, and there's no way of taking it out. Therefore, it's going to get the same dinim, the same holiness as the carbon chatos. Similar to that is the earthenware vessel in our pasuk. It absorbed the noiser. It's going to become exactly like noiser, and therefore you need to break it, like you burn noiser. And then there's a second din. Just like in the previous pasuk, there was the blood of the Karban Chatos that's got sprayed on a garment and you need to wash it out. In our pasuk, we have the copper vessel that something was absorbed, that something went onto it, something went into the meat of the Karban Chatos, but that could be taken out. And therefore, there's no chiyuv, there's no obligation to break this keli like the burning of noisar. Rather, all you need to do is just actually take it out, like the blood that was removed from the garment. Says the Rebbe, based on this, if we say that umoirak v'shutaf, scouring or rinsing it, is similar to washing out the blood of the Karban Chatos, the Rebbe says we can now take it a step even further. That by Rashi putting in the translation of the word umoirak right here, before the next Rashi, he's coming to tell us and to teach us that the din of rinsing, scouring or rinsing the copper keli is actually very different to the fact of the earthenware vessel being broken. In other words, it's not like they're both trying to do the same thing. We have an isser of noisar. In one case, we're breaking it, and in the other case, we're going to scour it and rinse it. Rather, the Rebbe is saying, no. The first part of the first din of the earthenware is actually dealing with noisar. The second din of Klei Nechoshes is actually not particularly dealing with noiser at all. Just like we're comparing it to the washing of the blood, it's not connected to any isur. It's a chiddush of the Torah because of the stringency of chatos. We want to get rid of that blood. The same thing. What was cooked in the copper keli, we need to scour it and rinse it. What went inside of it, not because of the isur of noiser, rather because of the fact that it came in contact with or absorbed the chatos, and therefore we're trying to get it out. How do we understand this? What are these two ideas? Says the Rebbe, we're going to understand it by first prefacing, going back to some of the questions we had earlier. Number one, how can we even speak about noiser and that which was absorbed in the walls of the pot? And number two, why doesn't the Torah tell us when it needs to be burned? Says the Rebbe, Rashi actually clarifies this in his wording, that's worded very carefully. Rashi says that which was absorbed in the pot, nasa noiser, became noiser. Rashi is not saying it's going to become noiser at a certain point. As soon as it was absorbed in the pot, it's noiser. Why is that? Says the Rebbe, the main obligation that we have with the meat of the carbon, obviously, is number one, to eat it. If we cannot eat it, the Torah tells us we're going to need to burn it. Now, usually that is after the time you're not allowed to eat it anymore. But says the Rebbe, al derech hapshat, according to the simple reading of the psukim, it would, if you had a situation even before the end time, the expiry date, that it's impossible to eat it anymore, it's already right now like noiser and therefore needs to be gotten rid of. Says the Rebbe, that's actually what's happening when the meat gets absorbed into the pot, into the earthenware pot. As soon as it goes into the earthenware pot, it becomes noiser. You're not going to be able to use it anymore, and therefore the halach is that it needs to be broken. But that's only by the earthenware pot, as opposed to the copper pot, that you will be able to get it out. How can you get it out? And how's it not going to be noiser? Says that I have a very simple example. If I go and cook there in that copper pot right now, other things, it's now going to take the flavor that went into the pot and it's going to come out into this new food, which we're going to eat, and noiser will never apply. So therefore, when we say that it needs to be scoured and rinsed, it's nothing to do with the isser of noiser. Rather, there's a separate din. We want to take out the meat of the Karban Chatos from the pot, just like we want to wash out the garment from the blood. It says that, but now we understand the order of Rashi very well. First Rashi, it translates the word umoirak, which again means like cleaning it, etc., which is similar, telling us that basically this din is more similar to the idea of washing the garment from the blood. And that's what Rashi continues in saying, lifleit bliyose, to take out which was absorbed. In other words, the concept of washing out, not similar to burning of noisar. And in order to clarify this even more, that by the copper pot, there is no din of noisar because it was absorbed, like in the earthenware vessel. Rashi continues and says, because by the earthenware vessel, it will never come out. And therefore, only there does the concept of noisar apply, whereas here, there's other ways of dealing with it. And therefore, there's another concept. We still need to scour and wash it. Even if there's no noisar, we still don't want that there should be chatos in it. The Rebbe concludes with a fascinating inyan in halacha. The Rebbe says, generally, there's a machloikas. According to the Rambam, this idea of an earthenware vessel being broken only applies to the Karban Chatos, whereas the scouring or rinsing of other vessels applies to all karbanos. According to the Ravid, both of these dinim, the earthenware vessel and the other vessels, apply to all karbanos. According to Rashi, will come out a third opinion. In regards to earthenware vessels, Rashi says clearly it's in regards to all karbanos. He doesn't write that when it comes to scouring or rinsing the copper vessels. Based on what we explained, it's understood. Because the din of noisar obviously applies to all carbonos. But this idea of scouring or rinsing it, it's only because of the stringency of carbon chatos, and therefore it will only apply to the carbon chatos.